Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Jones. I am a science and engineering librarian at Temple University, and I'm here with my colleague Courtney Eger, who is a learning and engagement librarian at Temple University. And our presentation is Why Won't They Return My Emails? Undertaking a Needs Assessment Project to Better Serve Subject Students and Faculty. So before we talk about why we perform needs assessments and what our processes and goals were, we're going to start with some basic definitions of needs assessment. The first actually comes courtesy of Wikipedia. We thought that this did a really great job of capturing what we were trying to do. So according to Wikipedia, a needs assessment is a systematic process for determining and addressing needs or gaps between current conditions and desired conditions. The discrepancy between current conditions and wanted conditions must be measured appropriately to identify the need. The need can lead to a current performance or deficiency. And then we have one from an article entitled Connector, Catalyst, and Common Good, Defining the Academic Library of the 21st Century. And this goes into a little bit more detail in the context of libraries and says a good needs assessment can reveal many things about a library. One of those things is that the library does not belong to the librarian alone. Ownership of the library is shared with library users. When patrons are given the opportunity to describe their needs, the library gains information that is vital to its activities and its future. When a needs assessment is structured carefully, it can become the real key to library growth and the justification for further decisions. So with that in mind, we were thinking that our own assumptions and limited view of library services shape our professional beliefs in a way that we hope is helping students and faculty, but there is a much better way to listen to them in order to address their own needs. Okay, so now we're going to talk about why we performed needs assessments.
Okay, I will start. So when I decided to perform a needs assessment, I was brand new to this position and institution, having worked at Temple for only about 5 months. I was assigned to be the subject librarian or liaison to the occupational therapy, physical therapy, and recreational therapy programs, all of which are part of the College of Public Health. The challenging part of being their liaison is that my library where I work is housed on the Health Sciences campus, whereas the College of Public Health is housed at the main campus, which is only physically a couple of miles down Broad Street, but very much in another world. Most of my students are graduate students, although there are a couple of graduate degree programs. The doctorate in OT program is all online, as is the master's degree in recreational therapy, so that was another outreach challenge. There was already some trouble communicating with faculty, and there was a lack of librarian-led instruction. In the past 2 years, there were only 3 lessons given to all of those programs. So when I began at Temple, I did attempt to schedule meetings with the program directors. I successfully had 1 meeting, but then that program director left for another job. I never met with the other 2. I also attempted email communication with them. I tried in-person office hours on their campus in the students' main building, but it was not very successful. I would sit for 4 hours at a time in a hallway in their building, essentially taking up a seat that a student could have used, and I just waited around for questions. I think over about 7 times of doing these office hours, I only had about 4 questions. So it was clear I had to be more strategic about connecting with these programs. Sarah?
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why I decided to perform a needs assessment. I've been a science and engineering librarian at Temple since July of 2017, but I took on liaison duties to the Computer and Information Science Department last summer, so in summer of 2019. And when I began serving as a liaison to CIS, I initiated the same outreach strategies that I'd had success with in my other science and engineering departments, but these strategies did not lead to the same results when I used them in CIS. So after a year in that role, I'd only met with 3 faculty, I taught a single class, and I'd had a small handful of questions from students. So clearly, things that I'd had success with in the past in other departments simply were not working. So Courtney and I worked with very different departments that had different practices and needs. And as a result, we had to take very different approaches to our needs assessment processes. So now we're going to share with you our goals, processes, and outcomes. Specifically, how we developed questions for the needs assessments, how we performed background research, how we communicated with faculty in our respective departments, and what we plan to do with the results of our assessments.
Okay, I'll begin with the goals and processes. So for my 3 departments, I knew I had to start by developing questions. So I literally made the longest list of every single thing I could possibly want to know about those subjects and their programs. I then thought it would be wise to connect with the library staff member who is in charge of assessment to ask for her feedback on the list and the various approaches that I could take to assess my programs. So she and I had a face-to-face meeting, and she thought it would be better to focus on either one program or one group that I serve, so either the students or the faculty. She thought that a survey to faculty would not really yield the results that I wanted, so she suggested conducting interviews with the program directors first. Other suggestions that she had were to send the questions ahead of time and to try to listen to the faculty and not sell them on the library. Just treat this as a listening opportunity. So we decided on the following next steps: that I should identify courses that may have a research component, create specific questions or topics for discussion, set up those meetings with the program directors, and then prepare myself for the meeting with those program directors. So then I spent about another month working on the list of questions and the draft of my introductory email. And I did ask my supervisor for feedback on the questions in the email just to clear up language. And her biggest suggestion was really make it, again, more about them and less about me as a librarian and the library. So my guiding questions to the program directors really were: what are the barriers your students face in searching for and using research? And what barriers do faculty face in teaching research skills? Then I knew I had to gather some background information, which I mostly did online. I gathered some basic information about each degree and about the faculty in each program via the College of Public Health's website. I reviewed the courses being offered through our university course directory, and I also reviewed the library's Spring Share Lib Analytics system for instructional statistics and also research consultation statistics. It was then finally time to send emails to the 3 program directors, and I heard from all 3 of them within a reasonable time period. I met with all 3 of them. For recreational therapy, they actually invited me to a faculty meeting, so I got to speak with all of the full-time faculty. For occupational therapy, I met with the program director. And for physical therapy, I also met with the program director, as well as an instructor who was pulled into the conversation while I was in the room. And I will tell you about the outcomes of these meetings after Sarah tells you about her process.
Okay, so Courtney had talked a little bit about how she drafted a list of questions. I began my process with her list of questions, which she was kind enough to share with me. And unfortunately, I added even more questions to her list based on my research into needs assessments. So by the time my list was complete, I had almost 50 questions, which thankfully I was able to pare down to something a little bit more reasonable. I also worked with Nancy Turner, who works with assessment in the libraries, to pare down my list to something that I could actually manage. She helped me develop a more realistic approach based on what I did already know about the computer and information science department, which basically is that they're not very responsive. So Courtney talked a lot about how she was able to communicate with faculty and instructors and students from her department. I took a very different approach in that area because I did not anticipate having much success with that route. So I knew this from my own attempts to reach the computer science department, as well as from just having some informal discussions with other computer and information science librarians. They all said that they had had similar experiences with their departments. They were not very responsive. And I assumed that they would be unlikely to meet with me or to do something like fill out a survey, for example, so that I could gather information about their information needs. So I devised some other ways of gathering information. This is where my strategy was very different from Courtney's. She worked with her departments. I sort of worked around my departments to try to find other ways to learn about what they might need. So I looked into a number of different places that I thought might provide me with some helpful insight into the department's workings. So some places that I brainstormed were within the library, so different public-facing library departments outside of my own that may have had some engagement with computer science. I also brainstormed some data sources like our course reserves, getting some numbers on the usage there, our collections data, and circulation numbers. I also looked at some general university sources to get basic numbers about the size of the programs and the kind of research that occur in those programs. And then I also looked at some external sources. For example, databases provided me with a lot of information about publishing that was happening for the faculty in my departments, and then just some general research on trends in the field of computer and information science. So with the goal of understanding the needs that the CIS department has that the library can meet, I devised a few more specific but still fairly general guiding questions. So what kinds of research are happening at the graduate, undergraduate, faculty levels at Temple? What are their data needs and what don't they provide in-house? So what are their data needs that the department doesn't take care of? And are there areas of research in the publishing process that are not currently supported, both in the department and in the larger university? So now we're going to talk a little bit about the outcomes of our needs assessments, as well as how things have changed due to the pandemic.
Okay, so let me first share with you all of the qualitative data that I gathered about student research behavior, because that's really what I focused on. So according to all three of my faculty groups, they said this: students don't know how to find reliable research, students aren't using scholarly journals, students struggle with writing, which they acknowledged isn't the librarian's job to correct. Instructors are assuming that students will remember how to research from semester or from year to year, and that came up in all three programs. Students are just using the first article result that pops up. Students are using websites. For occupational therapy and recreational therapy, they admitted that their disciplines don't have as many research journals, so their students really need to learn to use journals from other disciplines and apply that knowledge to their field, which is a struggle. They also said students have trouble with citation management software and accurate APA citations. In recreational therapy, the grad students struggle with more advanced database searching. Students struggle with finding and reading scholarly articles. They will cite the background or introduction section of an article, but not the original research within the article. Students struggle with synonyms or alternate keywords when searching the literature. The physical therapy department said that their research is a struggle because most of their curriculum is clinical based. And then finally, all of the departments said students struggle with connecting the literature and research to their future lives as clinicians. So I tried not to spend much of those face-to-face meetings coming up with solutions. I instead reflected on it myself a little bit later. And so from this data, I created my own list of goals for how I can address some of these issues that I learned about. So part of that is more instruction. And so I did make a list of places where I could go into the programs to give more instruction. For instance, I once taught in the level 1 occupational therapy research class, but I thought I could follow up in their level 2 research class. I found out that the physical therapy department has brown bag lunches, and so they suggested bringing a library workshop when we were in the meeting, so I thought that would be a great idea. We've talked about perhaps coming to the recreational therapy online orientation, and I thought about looking into the evidence-based practice course for first-year physical therapy students. Something else that actually they suggested to me in all of these meetings, all three meetings, were holding online office hours instead of those in-person office hours that failed a little bit. I thought that perhaps we could also bring some library workshops to different program meetings, much like that brown bag physical therapy lunch. I know that occupational therapy gets together, and sometimes even the entire college gets together. So I think we could bring some more library workshops into those settings and introduce the library to students more. I also want to create short videos that cover the basics of how to do different parts of research. And I think that would be especially useful for the online programs that I serve. All of the departments agreed that more exposure to me as their librarian for both students and faculty would increase engagement with the library at all levels. So I am trying to think of some other ways that I could put myself into these programs. Now, some of these outreach and engagement methods work well in the new online environment of COVID-19. Temple students are mostly virtual, as are many librarians and services. So instruction is virtual, and I have already taught for 2 of my programs online this fall. I'm also trying to hold virtual office hours every 2 weeks, but so far I have not had any visitors for the month of September. However, there's been an increase in our virtual research consultation appointments, which is great. So that's another way that I'm trying to get myself known in these programs, that I'm a resource for the students. And now let's see what Sarah learned.
Okay, so after considering all of the information that I was able to dig up from a number of different sources related to the Computer and Information Science Department, I identified 4 areas that seem like the most promising opportunities for library involvement in the department. First, something that I learned that I think is quite promising is that, unsurprisingly, the computer and information science courses that are open to non-majors, our general education classes taught out of the department, are extremely popular because, for obvious reasons, students from all disciplines want to learn computer science related concepts and skills. So I think that is a great place for library instruction. I learned that they have a writing intensive course that is seeking to improve their information literacy component. So I've already met with an instructor who's working on the syllabus for that. I've also learned that there is a dual computer science and physics undergraduate program. This is a great opportunity for me because the library has a very good relationship with the physics department. So that is another way for me to approach computer science, is through their affiliation with physics. And finally, I've learned that they have a data science concentration for undergrads, which may be a really good place to connect the computer science department with research data services at the library. So how am I planning to use these results to make changes? I've been working with this concept that I found really helpful from a blog post from Alex Weisberg at NC State. And Alex writes, a needs assessment is the what the organization needs, that precedes the gap analysis, the how to close the gap between what the organization is doing currently and where they want or need to be. So right now, I consider myself to be in the process of figuring out how to make these whats into hows, and I've been trying a few different things. The first place that I started was to rework my outreach approach. So everything from adapting the beginning of the semester email that I send to my other departments to reflect more the concerns and activities that I know are occurring in CIS. It also includes contacting specific faculty members that I've come across in my research who might be interested in specific library services or resources. I'm also considering, as a future project, although this is outside the scope of my current needs assessment, analyzing publication data to see if this would provide any useful insights into the scholarly activity of the computer science department. Midway through this project, the pandemic hit and we started going remote in mid-March. Because my needs assessment actually involved very little contact with the computer science department, many elements of my research for this project were not really affected. Surprisingly, though, remote teaching has opened a lot of lines of connection between the library and the computer science department. Initially, a number of faculty members reached out to me with remote access questions in March. That helped me establish some relationships with faculty. And then at the beginning of the fall semester, the provost sent out an email encouraging all faculty to adopt affordable, open educational resources as their teaching tools. And I got a huge response from the computer science department, which was very surprising to me because I did not really get a lot of contact based on this email from my other departments. So 4 different faculty from CIS contacted me, people I'd never spoken to before, asking for help identifying affordable textbook options. And that led to some really productive conversations. And in addition to helping me meet and establish relationships with these faculty members, this offered me some really helpful insight. I now know that OER is something that the computer science department is very engaged with, and I can help use this information for future outreach to the department. Okay, so with all that in mind, Courtney is going to share some of our concluding thoughts at the end of this project.
So we want to leave you with one concluding thought, and we do have the citation for this article from the Library Leadership and Management Journal. We thought it was a good quote to share. Understanding what users need requires that you first understand what faculty and students do and how they work. What are they trying to accomplish? What barriers do they encounter, and what would make their work lives easier? What are the gaps? What knowledge, expertise, and resources does the library offer that no one else on campus can or will provide? How can your library apply this unique portfolio to close these gaps? Exploring these questions involves deep campus engagement and the development of relationships that help faculty and students expand their traditional notions of a library and understand what is possible. And the answers to these questions should be central to every library mission and vision statement. So we hope that our processes and goals and outcomes have helped you in some way and inspire you to perhaps perform your own needs assessment. And with that, we do leave you with our contact information. You can reach me at courtney.eger@temple.edu. You can reach Sarah at sjones@temple.edu. And we look forward to hearing your questions later on for this session. So thank you, and we'll hear from you soon.
Thank you.